All right, good evening, everyone. We're waiting on Jason. Okay, so we went deep on CSS yesterday, and we'll be doing some more today. And then there'll be a lot of practical work throughout the week. Just quick question. Does anybody have anything they wanted to ask about in terms of CSS that came up yesterday?
No.
Make sure we're live. Okay, good. All right, so just a little bit of what we're going to do today. We're going to fill in a few specific pieces of data that'll help you as you're learning CSS. These are things that either are traditionally problematic when you're learning CSS, or they involve very odd, obscure terms that aren't very adequately explained. I'm just trying to set you up well for doing more practical lab work throughout the week for your homework. All good. Here's Jason. Good, a minute from Derive. Hey, Jason. We can't hear you. We got audio yet? Man, the world of Zoom calls. It's been almost 2.5 years now.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, totally. How you doing, man?
Yeah, pretty good. Sorry about that. My Discord had locked up on me or something, and I didn't see your message until I looked on my phone because I thought it was weird that I didn't see anything. And yeah, so
no problem at all. Just setting the basic tone for what we're going to get done tonight. We're going to do a sort of a miscellaneous collection of elements. Wrong word to use because we're studying CSS data about CSS. And these are things that traditionally are maybe harder to understand or aren't explained that well, have really odd, obscure terms. And this is all to set you up for being able to do a fair amount of homework this week in terms of practical lab work. And we're just going to dive right into it. There's no particular order. Well, there's a little bit of an order to some of these things. Some of them will code out a few examples. Some we'll just discuss, and I'll be asking questions along the way. So let me go ahead and switch to sharing screen. Did not mean to do that. Now I'm starting Visual Studio. Love that. I need to put that somewhere else. I hit that all the time when I think I'm going to start Visual Studio Code. Why'd they have to use the same symbol? All right, so we talked about selectors. Now, can someone tell me what a selector is?
It's like the heading, like H1 and paragraphs and things like that.
That's, I mean, you're close. That's an example of a selector. Let's look at, someone else want to take a crack at being more precise in terms of what CSS is all about?
There are 3 selectors: ID, class, pseudo class, and elements.
Right, but what is a selector?
A selector is like an identifier which CSS uses to style HTML elements.
Does it style the element? Are there any,
no,
is any part of a selector indicating style direction?
Most of the time it's about styling the content.
Okay, good. Let's get very precise. A selector is one part of a style rule. There are 3 parts of a style rule. The selector, which locates the element or elements that you want to do work on. The declaration block, which is a collection, and the items in that collection, which are declarations. In the declarations is where we actually provide the instructions for styling. So the selector is simply to locate the elements you want to work with. Now, Jonas, you were spot on. And the examples that were also provided of like an H1, those are all good examples of specific selectors. But the terminology is important because you're going to see these things split apart. You'll see discussions about selectors, discussions about declaration blocks, and discussions about actual declarations, the individual items. And you've got to have down what those terms mean. Now, Jonas, you were right about those three. Give me the three selectors that you were sort of talking about already.
ID, class, pseudo class, and elements.
Good. Excellent. So you can select elements. You can select for elements that have a specific ID. You can select for elements that are members of a class. And as we talked about last night, you can select for members that are a pseudo class. Can someone explain what a pseudo class is?
It's a specific set of an element.
Yeah, exactly, Jonas. It's the set of a specific element. Go ahead.
For instance, in anchor elements, we have active state, hover.
Yeah, absolutely. As we're going to discuss tonight, many of the terms and concepts that we have to work with in designing our web interfaces come from the printing industry that's been around since the 1500s. One of the things that wasn't really a factor in the traditional printing industry was the state of a piece of content. It was static, it was on the page. But we have a dynamic interface. We have an interface that the user can interact with. And so most of the time when we're talking about these pseudo classes, a user has done something with or to our content. And it's something that has some significance to us in terms of this interface and how people use it. Notice this example was good, like hovering over, a specific element. Well, that means something to us. That means that we are aware, or at least the browser is now aware, that the attention of the user is being placed on a specific thing. I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if in the not too distant future, that so displays are capable of detecting the exact spot on a screen that we're looking at, capturing that fact, and we'll have a new state to work with as web developers, that something's being looked at. So that's a pseudo class. Now we're going to discuss two more selectors, or I think three. Yeah, three. The first one is called a Combinator Selector. Then there's Pseudo Element Selectors. It's different from Pseudo Class. And then an Attribute Selector. Has anybody heard of these three or any of them? Now, I don't expect you to memorize all of these selector types. One of the big takeaways here is that we simply need a way to specify either the individual element that we want to work with or the collection of elements we want to work with. And we've got a number of different ways we can do that. Some of those ways are over on the HTML side. If we go back to yesterday's material and look at style rules, what we've been discussing is what you can apply the rule to, and we looked at, where are they? Oh, they're down in here in specificity. ID class and element and pseudo class, right? So we discussed all these yesterday. Now, one way to start thinking with this is, if you're trying to think of all the ways you can select a single element or a collection of elements, first think with Well, what are the things that are purely and only HTML related? Like a class or an ID. And part of the reason I recommend you think with those is those are the ones that exist down inside the actual file itself. How many of you recall the diagram I made several classes back that showed the basic operation of the web browser in sending out a request to a server? The server has the file gets sent back as a response to the browser. Anybody not remember that?
I remember it.
You do or don't?
Yep.
Okay, good. One of the things I'm going to continually hammer over and over and over again is that cycle. Because so much of what we do as engineers, as web developers, is based around that exact cycle. So let's think about this for a moment. This file that we have on the screen right here, where is that file going to live? Where's it going to be stored?
So,
Say it again, Sudesh.
so
A server, a web server, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we think about that, if we go in here and we set an ID, or we set a class, or Proton, whatever class, you can make them up, right? All of that is being done in a place that the browser doesn't operate in. It's down on a server. We're creating our elements, our divs, our H1s, our Ps. We're creating all of those and saving them in files that are static. They're just stored out on a file server somewhere. And we can call that a web server, but it's just a server. It just holds files and folders. So the first thing to think with CSS being able to select things is, well, I've certainly got to be able to, in the browser, read through one of these files, these HTML files, and at least find the elements and elements with specific ID and elements of a certain class. So that tells you the first three, because those are the ones that we are responsible for creating in our static HTML files that get stored on a server. The others don't come into play until this file you're seeing right in front of you actually gets shipped to a browser. And more importantly, the browser reads through it and creates that document tree in memory. And then creates a display on the screen. At that point, a big number of other ways to select a single element or a collection of elements comes into play. And they all have to do with the fact that you're no longer dealing with a static file. You're dealing with a running computer program that can maintain data structures in memory. One of those data structures is, of course, the document tree. If I do Alt-B and open this up again, and we go right-click and inspect and look at that document tree, this is an object that's being managed in memory on my computer. It's a completely different beast than a static file. Not only is it being managed in memory, but it is being used, essentially, to create what we see on the left right here, this display. So now you have a totally different environment. So there are different ways to be able to select items. For example, we take this away and we're just the user right now. Then we have interactions we can have. We can click on items. We can highlight items. We can roll the cursor over parts of the page. There's different things we can do here that have no place in a static file like this when it's down on the server. But CSS wants to be able to apply styling rules here. So we've got to start to think of selectors that would apply in a live, living computer program environment that can accept user input, that can detect what the user is doing. And that's what these other selectors come from. So with that in mind, let's look at those selectors again. One of them is this pseudo class that we looked at yesterday. And again, this class is not the same as a class in our static HTML document right here. Totally not the same thing as this, because it operates in, it applies in a different environment. It applies in a live environment where you have a rendered web page on the screen. Now in that rendered web page, these elements can have different states. This link right here can be unhovered, just sitting there. It can be hovered over. It can be clicked. So all of those things are different states. And so you need a way to select it. Now, I know we covered that yesterday. Just want to reinforce it. Now, let's look at this other one I just discussed here. If we go back to today's, it says there's a Combinator Selector. Now, this is selected based on a relationship between elements. Let's see where this falls in. Is it something that applies to the static HTML files or applies to the live display and web environment that our users actually live in when they use our web pages? Pardon me. So, anybody have a guess on what this is? Just from the text that I wrote down?
Would it be like sibling type of selectors?
Bingo. You're spot on. So is this something that really we think about in the context of the static files living on a web server, or we think about in the browser environment?
Browser environment.
Exactly, because that's where the document tree actually exists. Now, in our minds, we can all look at a file like this, especially if it's simple, and we can start to construct in our head what the document tree looks like. And you'll get more and more skilled at that as you advance your career, as you do more and more coding. You can hold relatively complex mental models in your head. But we don't do our computing in our head. That's not where the users actually access data. So you're totally right. It doesn't apply down here in these static files. Instead, it applies right here. More precisely, like Alexander was alluding to, it has to do with parents and their children, their descendants, and all these relationships we discussed yesterday. So a combinator, we talked about, let me show it to you on the screen again. A combinator is a type of selector. And we're going to select a single element or a collection of elements based on the relationship between elements. So, what are the different relationships we have?
Parent, child, ascendant, descendant.
Good. Someone tell me again the basic definition for each of those four. And there's a fifth one. What does it mean when we say a parent?
The element directly before you that's connected.
Good, exactly. You know, element directly higher in the hierarchy,
Yeah,
that you're connected to. Exactly. That's a parent. What's the difference between a parent and ascendant? Yeah, ascendant. What is that? What's the difference?
anywhere higher in the tree.
Good. Anywhere connected higher in the tree.
Yeah, connected. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, good. Someone else can someone else explain child and descendant?
The element directly below and connected would be the child,
Yes, excellent.
and then descendant would be just connected but further down the tree.
Yeah, spot on. So that's 4. What's the 5th one?
Siblings.
Exactly. On the same level, connected and on the same level. In other words, more precisely, children that share the same parent. Those are siblings. Okay, good. Now, that said, let's look at these combinator selectors. Let me switch over to, all right, I'll use that. Is this selector meant to grab one element or a collection of elements? The first one, the descendant selector.
A collection.
Exactly. Now, there might only be one down there, but it's intended to select all the descendants below a specific element. Here's what that one looks like. Any descendants of a div would be selected if they are paragraph elements. You can see it in English. Selects all paragraph elements inside div elements. Now, this one's harder to spot because there's no symbol. This is the space. So that's how we can grab the hierarchy elements. If we go back to what we looked at yesterday, I think I have to go view, and then I can click on it. There we go. And look at this diagram we're looking at. What would that rule apply to in this diagram right here? How many elements would that rule apply to? I'll show you the rule again. In fact, we'll take this here and we'll put it to the right. And we'll grab this, and you can see it on the left. So in this document tree, how many elements would this rule apply to?
3.
Perfect. Tell me which ones.
Div P P E M.
You broke up on that. Give it to me again.
It's div the P P E M under the
Right in
div.
here.
Yeah.
Good. So would it apply to the EM, the emphasis tag?
Yes.
Nope.
No.
It only applies to the specific element you're looking for that has the relationship to the first one. It's more precise than that. It's just the paragraph elements that are inside a div element. So whatever rule you set here will not apply to anything that isn't a paragraph element. Does it make sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now, we do have inheritance. If the rule makes sense to inherit, or rather, if the element type makes sense that it would inherit, it will. But we aren't precisely calling that relationship out. The relationship we're looking for here in this combinator, because combinators are all about relationships. We're saying in the document tree, relative to the first element type, find all of the second element type that are descendants. and apply the following rule to that second element type, as long as it matches. Any questions on that one? And again, go ahead.
It is related with specificity, since I see first we look at div, then we go to the p elements. So we are going.
Yes, that's spot on. If we go back to yesterday's material and look at specificity, then yes, this ABC system absolutely works, because you would get 2 points for this. There's 2 element names. So your C would be 2. If there was a conflict, remember, specificity is all about how do you resolve conflict. Is that what you were asking about, Jonas?
Yes.
Good. That was a really good call. So that's descendant. You can see also that there's child. How many elements is that one intended to locate? One or a collection?
One.
Nope, because you can have more than one kid. So it specifies an element. That's the first one. And then you put the greater than symbol. And what you're looking for is all of the children of the first one that are the second type. So this says, give me all paragraphs that are children of a specific div. Now, what's the difference between these two? The descendant and the child selector.
One is for any descendant and one is just for child.
Yes, if we look back at this document tree, these paragraph tags are children of this div. If we had more structure, like another paragraph down below, although you don't usually nest paragraphs, but if we had more structure down below, then the descendant one, the descendant selector, would grab any paragraphs down the chain, down the tree. The child would not. It would only grab these 2 paragraphs. And anything down below, even if it was a paragraph, would not be being selected. So it's just a little more granularity, a little more precision in deciding where you want to apply a rule. Questions about the child selector?
So the child selector is a special case of the descendant selector.
Yeah, you could look at it that way, because you only go one level deep. From wherever you start, which is the first element type that you choose, you only go directly below it, and you don't look any farther. All right. There's 2 siblings, adjacent and general. Remember, we look at the first one and we look at a relationship. We're looking for siblings of that one. More precisely, we are getting one element. This is not selecting a collection. It selects an element. And it says here, the terminology is important. It says directly after. It means following. They can be at the same level. But in the structure of how you wrote your document, one is written before the other. Let's look at that diagram right here, and let's see what adjacent elements we have. So if we did H1 And we did a plus, and then we did a P for a paragraph. Which element in that document tree would that rule apply to?
Any siblings that have that are div and p?
Oh, sorry, never. I'm rewriting this rule. I'm saying it's a different rule. I apologize. I'm saying, what if the rule were H1 plus P?
Oh, then it would grab the H1s and the Ps on that third row on the left under the div.
So it would grab. Okay, so
One,
go ahead. Anybody else have a different idea on that?
one of the P's, the first P.
It'd be the first P. So Jason, it's
Oh,
very
gotcha.
important.
Okay.
Yeah. Now there's two elements I need you to examine about your answer. Okay. Have you had the idea that the one that we list first also gets selected?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
It doesn't.
Oh, okay.
We're selecting a P element based on its relationship to a div element, but we're only selecting the P elements.
Gotcha. So for both of them to be selected, it would need to be div plus P, right?
No, what you would do is oh, if you wanted children, here, I'll show you. We do general sibling. And we'll demonstrate this in code so you can see it work. Okay.
Okay.
In fact, for this one, let's jump over to the code demo. I'm assuming you've all found W3 schools. Anybody not familiar with W3 schools? Okay, good. I love how simple their explanations are. Let's look at the difference between this adjacent sibling and general sibling. So this is adjacent. Let's go and look in detail at this code on the left here. First of all, the parts we care about are the style rules that we're setting, and then the document tree inside the body. So let's look at the rules we're setting. We're looking for paragraph that are children, more precisely adjacent children, or sorry, we're looking for paragraphs that are adjacent siblings of divs. It selects an element. So let's look through here and find any instances of a paragraph that is a sibling of a div. Here's a paragraph tag, but it's not a sibling of a div. Here's another paragraph tag. It's not a sibling of a div. Now, is this paragraph tag a sibling of a div?
Child.
Good. It is inside the div. Is this paragraph element a sibling of a div element?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Is it the adjacent sibling of a div? Where,
Yes.
yeah, adjacent is directly after.
Yes.
Good. Which div is it a sibling to, an adjacent sibling to?
The one
The
above.
div that is directly above.
Right here. Okay, so what about this? We've got a div right here. And this paragraph element is right next to it. Why isn't that one being affected by our style rule?
Since we have to go, first we look at div, then we look at a paragraph element that is next to the div, not before it.
Good. The word is technically is after. If we say next to, these two are next to each other. It's after. And we literally mean after in terms of how you wrote the text document. So this one's a little weird. If you recall, I was harping on at the beginning of the class about style rules and selectors, really, that revolve around our static files when they're down on the server. That's picking by element and picking by ID and picking by class, versus the ones where we're selecting elements based on the operating live environment out in the browser. This is a combination of the two. Because when we look at the document tree, these paragraphs on the exact same level as this div right here. In fact, we can just take all of this right here. Let's just take this, copy it. Let's go to our friendly neighborhood Visual Studio Code. And where is this? I'm just gonna do file new. And I'm gonna paste all that in. I'm gonna save this. And I'm gonna call it demo2.html. So now we're gonna run this locally. I'll do my Alt B, and here it is. Let's look at this tree. Here's our document tree. Notice that we have this div right here and this div here. They're all on the same level. This paragraph is all on the same level. All of these are all siblings. Every single one of them. The H2, the P, the div, this P, this P, this div, this P, this P, they're all siblings. Anybody have any questions about how to read this? Anybody think they weren't siblings? Okay, so they're all siblings, they're all on the same level. However, when we look at this idea of a combinator that says, hey, we want an adjacent sibling, and it says we want to select an element that is directly after another specific element, what does after mean? Where did we get the concept of after? We got it from a static file. And yes, we've pulled that same structure over into this tree, so we can use it to figure it out. This is why paragraph 3 right here does in fact get highlighted yellow, because we set the style rule. In fact, if we click on this, you can see the style rule right here. We're saying for any paragraph element that is an adjacent, that is the adjacent child of a div, the only one, then apply this background color. And this also answers that question, as you guys got right, of why paragraph 4 is not highlighted. Paragraph 4 is not adjacent to a div. All right, good. Any questions about how that adjacent child works? Okay, so let's have some fun, and we'll look at what is this general sibling. It says all elements, their next siblings. So let's do the try it yourself. Same rule right here, with one exception. All paragraph elements that are general siblings of a div element we want the background color to be yellow. So these first paragraphs are not general siblings of a div because we haven't even had a div element yet. Now we have a div element, and now our CSS rule starts paying attention. It says, okay, every general sibling, every single sibling I encounter later that's on the same level as me, if it's a paragraph, I get to make the background color yellow. So paragraph 3 gets yellow. You can see it on the right. This is not a paragraph element, so we don't do anything to it. This paragraph, it says paragraph 4, it also turns yellow. So there's the difference. Here, we can get the very first instance of the matching element. This is a child, no, this is a sibling. Here, we can get every matching instance. Any questions about that? Now here, I don't expect you to memorize all this stuff. That would honestly be absurd. I just want you to know that it's possible. The degree of control you can have over how precise you want to be in your strategy surrounding choosing the elements you want to apply some style rules to. It can be very, very precise. And the tools are built in to give you that precision. But again, you don't need to memorize all of it. If you know the basics, if you know there's a document tree and you know there's relationships, well, then it would certainly seem like it'd be possible to choose elements based on their relationship to each other. Parent, child, sibling. That would kind of make sense. Well, yeah, there is. And rather than memorizing all the exact syntax, look it up when you need it. All right. Okay, any questions about this next type of selector, this combinator? Again, 4 of them. All descendants, that selects multiple. Child, that selects single. Oh, wait, wrong. Selects all children, right? Adjacent selects a single one, the very first following matching element. And then general sibling selects all following matching elements. All right, good. So what's the next kind of selector? We had pseudo class. What does pseudo class relate to? Again, what are you selecting based on?
Based on state.
Yes, an element state. Good. So pseudo element instead of pseudo class, you can select a specific part of an element and style it. Let's look at that. That's kind of interesting, fun, odd. All right. Now, this syntax should be very similar to what you've seen yesterday with a pseudo class. But instead of using 1 colon, we use 2. So what does it do? We want to style a specific part of an element. Elements have parts. For example, it says here you can style the first letter, the first line of an element. You can put content before or after the content in the element. You can get very precise about what you do here. Now, this pseudo element, this isn't what you'd write. There are specific types of built-in pseudo elements. Here's a pseudo element called the first line pseudo element. So you put the selector, in this case, paragraph. Then you put 2 colons, and then you put the pseudo element you want, the part of an element you want. Here we want the first line of the paragraph. In other words, these are defined for you ahead of time. You don't get to make them up. Like we make up our own classes. We make up our own IDs. You don't make up pseudo line or pseudo elements. So let's look at this for a moment and see what it would look like. Can anybody predict what this is going to look like?
First line of the paragraph is in color and small caps.
Yep. Anybody know what that color is? I sure hope you're not that big of a nerd. I don't know it by heart. A lot of people who do design would look at it instantly and know that it's red. But I don't. Okay, good. So here's my question. When it says the first line is going to be in small caps and will be red, what do we mean by the first line of the paragraph? When does the first line end?
I don't know.
This is where CSS gets really cool. So here it is. We said for any paragraph element, use the pseudo element first line, grab a hold of that first line and apply the following style declarations. First declaration is color with a value of red. Second declaration is font variant with a value of small caps. All right. So it's done it. We have this first line pseudo element. It's not really an element, it's a fake element. There's no such thing as the first line of a paragraph element. That wasn't built into HTML. But the browser is smart enough to figure it out. And look at how smart it is. Watch the first line. The answer to that question, Jason, is the first line is however long it takes until the text wraps.
Okay, I got
next
you. That
line.
makes sense.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Now, you can imagine that there would be no way in a static web file to provide instructions like that and make it do that. You can't say, listen, here's this paragraph, and after the 7th word, stop being read. No, we want the whole first line, but the quote unquote first line isn't a thing until our file, our static file here, has been sent to the browser and actually rendered on the screen. Now we have a quote unquote first line. And that's why it's a pseudo element. It's not a real element. What you're looking at on the screen are real elements. Elements are built-in parts of the HTML specification. And first line is not something that's built in because it's got nothing to do with a static text file. So that's what these pseudo things are in CSS. They exist only temporarily while our pages are being displayed on the screen, while users are interacting with the screen, the user interface. So a pseudo element is a quote unquote fake element that springs into existence once we render our visual interface. When it's rendered, now our browsers, if we give them the right instruction, can do really cool things. We go back, for example, to some of the examples here. We already saw the first line one, right? We can do all of these things to the first line. We can change its font, its color, its background, word spacing, all these things. We can even be more precise. How about the first letter? We want it to be extra large. There we go. It's large and it's red. And you can set all kinds of things about it. Again, this is a pseudo element. It only exists at the time that your page is being rendered. You can get very precise. Here is paragraphs with a class of intro. And when you have that, the fake class or fake element or pseudo element of the first letter, when that exact condition exists, please apply these style rules. Hold on, I'm going to make this thing go away once and for all. Where is it? There. All right. Refresh. Okay, good. Okay. So we've seen two pseudo elements. We've seen first line, seen first letter, right? You can actually combine these things. Here we're specifying what do we do on the first letter, what do we do on the first line. They both apply to the same sort of area. But let's look and see what that does. First letter pseudo element, we've said make it red and extra large. The whole first line, make it small caps and blue. And they can play nice together. Notice that the small caps and blue is not overriding the first letter pseudo element. They can be combined. So again, you can get very, very precise. I don't expect you to memorize all these things. I certainly don't. I look them up when I need them, but I want you to know it's possible. And the concept, you're trying to apply style rules to something that will only exist when you have a live web page being displayed. All right. So this is when you see a lot, the before pseudo element. It isn't a real element. It just means, hey, right before an element, there's a pretend space, a pretend thing that I can force into existence. I want you to put something there. Now, in all reality, there's some other element probably that is immediately prior to or adjacent to this, like H1 in our example. But for a specific case, we're overriding it and saying, no, I want you to put something else in. Let's look at this example where we're going to make a smiley face come before every single H1 element.
Eric?
Yeah.
What would be the difference of not just putting an image search in, the image src with a smiley?
Putting in the image comes with a lot of other things that need to be configured, for example. And the images have to be stored, and it has a certain amount of space it already takes. Now, in terms of the appearance on the page, you could make it so they looked almost exactly the same, but you'd probably have to tweak the image tag a lot to get it to look exactly the same. The before, actually, you know what, Ellen? Probably not much any difference at all. Probably not much difference at all. We can actually experiment with it. Hold on just a moment. I'm going to put something in there in our homework that we're going to do. Great, you just gave us homework. Nice spelling, huh? You like that? Work out whether an image element before a, let's say, H1 behaves differently than there we go. I've never actually tried it, and I want you guys to do it. By the way, that's one of the coolest things about this whole web development piece is you can experiment with all these things for free in your browser with no special infrastructure for the most part. So I like that question. I don't know the answer, and I'm going to find out like you guys are. Here we go. All right, so let's get back to this. So yeah, we've said here's a pseudo element. This is the space right before a given element that's listed here. And we're going to define content in it. And we're going to point to a specific image. URL would have been defined elsewhere in the actual application. Okay. So that's what it looks like. There's lots of other ways to achieve the same effect. This is one way to do it. You see this a lot in certain frameworks, though. I just want you to know what it is when you're looking at it. So that's before. After is the same thing, except it goes after. Another thing about the difference here, actually, is that if you have styling rules that apply to a paragraph, this after should be included in it. If it's a separate element entirely, it won't have the same rules applied to it. Okay, markers. What's a marker? Anybody know what a marker is?
The dot discuss circles list items.
Yeah, it's the symbol that represents an individual item in a list. So here we want to make them red. Whatever the symbol is. Without modifying anything, for an unordered list, it's just dots. For an ordered list, it's numbers. You can use style rules to change what the symbol is. But here, we're changing the appearance of said symbol. We're not changing the symbol. We're changing the appearance of the symbol. So that's marker. Again, there isn't really an element in HTML for this little piece right here, for these markers. It's not an element. It kind of gets generated on the fly by the browser. And when it's generated, it is a fake element called the marker. Well, we can style it. We can do things to it. This is where you see some really cool, funky stuff being done in web interfaces, is because the designers know about these, how they can hook into something on the page and modify it. And that's, again, one of the biggest takeaways here. You don't have to memorize all these syntaxes. Just know that there's virtually nothing on that page that you can't either locate and change, or that you can't locate and change. Virtually nothing. All right, we're an hour in. I need to get some water. I want us to take a quick break and we'll come back. Anybody have any questions before we take a break?
Nope.
All right. Let's take 10 minutes and I'll see you then. All right. Welcome back. All right, let me go ahead and look at participants. All right, Jason, you here? Jason? Okay, Jonas?
Hi.
Good, Alexandra?
Yes.
Good, Alan?
Yep.
Great, Sudesh?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, Jason, you back yet? Hola, Jason. Okay. All right. We'll catch him up when he gets here. Okay, good. So again, for context, okay, we're looking at all these selectors and all different ways of selecting things, because honestly, it's one of the most important things is being able to locate the precise things on the page that you want to manipulate. And again, high level, some of those things exist because we wrote them into our HTML files. Some of them exist because they come into being once our page is actually being rendered on the screen. And we can use those two things to locate the exact thing on the page we want to change. That's the big takeaway. And yes, there's all these different names for them and how they all work, right? If we look at the markdown here, we've got combinators. This is relationships. We've got pseudo elements. These are pretend elements that come into being once the actual page is rendered, right? And then we looked at pseudo classes yesterday, something that has to do with the state of an element. And of course, state only matters once the page is being rendered on the screen, right? But now the last one we'll look at is attributes. Now, can someone tell me again what an attribute is in HTML?
It's a property of the element,
Good.
not the content.
Now, you're close. An element includes the content. What are the two parts of an element? The content and what else?
Value.
Tags.
The tags. An element is the sum of the tags and the content in between. That whole thing is called an element. So you were very close, Jonas. An attribute is a quality or characteristic, not of the element as a whole, but of the tags. You can assign qualities or characteristics to tags. So let's look at attribute selectors, what they are, how they work. It's possible to style elements that have specific attributes or attribute values. Now, before we look at this one, Can anybody tell me what the target attribute is? If you don't know, totally fine. We're just going to look it up because that's how syntax works. Anybody have any idea?
Is it like the href?
Say it again, Ellen.
Is it where you put the address like href, href?
Href itself is an attribute. The href, it's good you brought that one up. That's points to where you're actually linking, right? It's the hyperlink reference. So let's look at what actually.
I think target.
Go ahead. What is it, Jonas?
For instance, if we say target equals quote unquote blank, we open a new tab. We don't stay on the page.
Good. That example is right, and it brings in to focus what target is all about. It says where you're going to open up the referenced document. Do we open it up in the same tab we're in a new tab, in a new window? Now, question, how would you Google trying to figure out what target is here? Can someone tell me what I should Google?
Target, CSS Target Attribute Selector. I don't know.
Good, let's try that. CSS Target Attribute Selector. That takes us where we were. The attribute value selectors. This is telling us all about selectors. We just want to know what the what the target attribute is. What's a different thing we can look at?
CSS Target Attribute.
Same stuff. This is all selectors.
Hmm.
So my question is this: does target have anything to do with CSS? Is a target a CSS concept? It's an HTML concept, isn't it?
Oh, okay. That makes more sense. So I guess we would do HTML.
Well, this is actually super important. Attributes themselves have nothing to do with CSS. An attribute is a quality or characteristic of a tag. And this is a real important thing. I just want to break for a second and have you all pay attention. We're bumping into something that's very common when you're trying to study technology. And that is that many technologies are built to work together. They work in concert. And when you learn them, they're very often taught simultaneously. And one of the challenges in genuinely understanding how, say, two different technologies work is being able to pull them apart into separate subjects while you're learning them. That's one of the primary things I'm trying to do as we move along through this training. You can find training on all these subjects that we're going to cover in this full stack bootcamp anywhere. But in many, many cases, multiple technologies are taught together for a good reason. They're used together. HTML is almost useless without CSS. Let me show you an example of that. If we go here to the very beginning of CSS Home, example, where is it? Introduction, I think. Look at this home page. This is the same exact page with different style settings. I'm going to click on style sheet 1. That's where we're at. Click on style sheet 2. That's the same content. Style sheet 3, same content. Style sheet 4, same content. Vastly different user experience. So it kind of, quote unquote, makes sense to learn these two things together. But in order to genuinely understand them, you've got to rip them apart. CSS doesn't even have a meaning unless HTML exists. Its sole purpose is to control the styling, the appearance of this thing called HTML. And so when you're over in the CSS world, which is what we're concentrating on now, you've got to be able to identify when you're looking at instructions, education material, what parts of that material are over in the HTML world, because they are the effect or they are acted upon. CSS. So the terminology actually really does matter a lot here. And the underlying concepts matter a lot. So let's look at that example. What were we looking at here? We're looking at go back. There we go. Attributes. I was asking, like, how is it that you would Google what this target attribute is all about? And the mistake, and Jason, it's a totally understandable mistake. This is on me for not properly separating out these two concepts. The mistake was, well, we're studying CSS. I should look up what this target thing is relative to CSS. But the fact is, it doesn't have anything to do with CSS because it's an attribute, and attributes have nothing to do with CSS. They are simply and only an HTML concept. They are a quality or character of a tag over in HTML. So the way you'd find it is HTML target attribute. First link. This attribute called target specifies where to open a linked document. Now that is a purely HTML concept. It's got nothing to do with styling. In fact, in this sentence is the entire reason HTML was ever created in the first place. Right there. We want to link documents. Done. Full stop. That's all HTML really is. So when we see here target and it says blank, well, what does that mean? Remember, an attribute is a quality or character that can be controlled, but it has to have a value. A possible value is blank. So what are some of the actual values? Oh, blank, self, parent, top. So blank will open the document in a new window or a tab, new tab. Self opens the linked document in the same frame, the same tab essentially. Parent opens in a parent frame. We don't get into frames very much, okay? Linked document in the full body of the window. The ones you're going to see all the time are blank or you don't set it at all. That's what you'll find 95% of the time. Either we don't care where it opens, whether it overrides the current, like watch right here, when I click on keyboard shortcuts, this link opens in self. It's a default. Look at that. I'm still in the same tab and overrode. Now I'm going to simulate it, but what if this link was set to blank? Maybe the same as doing this. Open a new tab. And there it is over here, except it would open it up for you to look at. So that's what target's all about. Now, I know we went off a little bit of a tangent there, but I felt it was important to strip apart these concepts. When we look at an attribute selector, we're saying over in the HTML world, which is what CSS is all about. CSS is about reaching into our HTML world and grabbing one or more elements and doing stuff with them. In the HTML world, we can specify, hey, I'm trying to locate elements. And the defining filter, if you will, is I'm looking for elements that have a specific attribute or where the specific value of an attribute is what I'm looking for. So here, we're simply saying, listen, if there's an anchor tag and we have at least set a target attribute. I want to know about it. I don't care whether or not that attribute is value is blank, self, parent, top. I don't care. If we have at least set that attribute for this given tag, the anchor tag, well, give me that entire element. Give me the whole thing. I want to style that bad boy. I want to do something with it. That's what this specific attribute selector uses. And all you do is you put the attribute in square brackets. But now let's get more precise. I'm looking for a specific value for that attribute. So here we're saying it isn't enough to just give me all of the anchor tags, A, that have defined any target attribute. I only want the ones that have a target attribute of blank. Any questions? Okay, cool. Jason, did that help my pulling apart those two concepts?
Yeah. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons people get tripped up with CSS so commonly. It's because they just kind of can get confusing like that. But yeah, that is perfect. I appreciate it.
Good, excellent. All right. Now, look at this little thing. By the way, what is this character called? Anybody know?
Tilde.
Yeah, it's a tilde, T-I-L-D-E. Okay. What does it mean in common English?
Like approximation.
Yeah, approximately, roughly. Good, excellent. All right, so this is a whole different selector. It's not attribute equals selector. It's attribute approximately equals. And here, we're looking for a specific word. Now, this is kind of interesting. Let's think about the attribute of class. Let's go back to our HTML here. And let's say I set an attribute here of class, and I'm going to call it main. And this div down here, class is junior. And this one down here, I'm going to do another div. And this one, I'm also going to give a class of junior. Now, let's contrast that with an anchor tag. So I'm going to make an anchor tag here. There's my anchor tag. Let's go in and set some of the attributes. Well, I need a hyperlink reference. Send it to google.com. I also have a target. And that is going to be blank. So I want it to open up in a different tab. Let's render this. Did somebody say something? Okay. Let's pull this up. Oh, I didn't put any text for my anchor. Yeah, Google. All right, so here's my link, and I click on it. It takes me to Google. Okay, good. And it opened up in another tab, which is what I intended. Okay. Now let's go back to the code. When I was typing in the value for this href attribute, do I select from a pre-made list of options? Are there only so many websites I'm allowed to choose from?
No, you can choose any website.
Yep, you can type any content you want here, and as long as it's a valid hyperlink reference, it'll work. What about the value for this target attribute? Can I type anything I want in there?
Sure, it may not work.
Say it again.
Yeah, you can type anything. It may not work though.
I like that, Jason. Yeah, you can put whatever you want. What am I expected to choose from there?
One of the values for that attribute.
Yeah, one of the pre-made values. Okay, so I'm stressing that because this next one only makes sense in certain instances. Let's go back to the material here and look at this attribute selector called the tilde equals or approximately equals. What it actually means here is we're looking for a value that has a specific string. It says word, but we're looking for a specific string pattern right here. So some of those strings will be stuff that we already know. For example, title tilde equals flower. We could also have one that says anchor or target tilde equals blank. In other words, this right here. It would still work because we're looking for a specific exact string. Let's see if we can even rewrite this. Let's take this little context right here. See, tilde approximately equals or title. Let's see if we can rewrite this. So here's our little playground. Right now, we can see this work. We have here a style rule that says, if there's an anchor with an attribute of target whose value is blank, then please make the background of only that anchor tag or that anchor element yellow. And you can see it in action right here. The Descendant.com is in yellow is precisely because we have not just set a target attribute, but the value is blank. Now I want to rewrite this. I want to say a target. I'm going to say tilde equals, and then we'll put in the string. See if that'll run. It still runs and doesn't throw any errors. It would totally break if it did. We can even mess it up here. Let's misspell that and run it. And notice it's not yellow anymore. Now I'll change it back to K and it runs. Now this would be a really weird way to do this, but it works. Why would it be weird to do it this way? And weird is an opinion, so it's less important than some of the data I'm giving you. Why do you think it might be kind of weird to do it the way I just did it here?
Since it's a value that is already predefined, there is no need to get the approximate.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So if we do Control Z and switch this back, the values inside the double quotes here, or actually they don't even need to be in quotes. These values come from a predetermined list. Ellen's exactly right. So there's no need to try to match text strings when we're choosing from predefined list. Just put down which of the elements in that list we would like to match on. And my way of doing it clearly worked. But this comes down to quality coding standards. Just because it works doesn't mean it's helpful to you or others in the future. This would hang me up. I would look at this. I've never done it this way before, by the way. I just did it just to experiment and see if that would work. But no one should put this in their code, because I would look at it and go, why did they do that? Is there some reason that we're doing it differently than normal? And I would get hung up on what the developer's mind was going through when they wrote that. So don't be too smart for your own good. Yes, it worked, but there's no reason to do it. Do it this way. Okay, good. But now you see what the tilde equals. I don't even know how to say it in English. I don't know how I would say that. Like, it's not even really approximately equals, kind of, but it's actually a strict exact match on the strings. Anybody ever heard it pronounced? I never have. Oh. Yeah, see, it's an exact match. Look at the match. Look what it says right down here in terms of matches. It won't match this because it's got to be a complete separate individual word. Yeah, I don't know what to call it. I'm going to call it tilde value. But you know it exists. Now there's a way to do this. All right, so again, step out to the big picture. We're looking at about the sixth way to select things, attribute selectors. We looked at, yesterday we looked at select by, where are they? ID, select by class, select by element. Okay, so we've already looked at these. And then today we looked at select by a combinator. This is our hierarchical relationship. Select by pseudo element. This is a fake element that only exists when you have a live document being rendered, before, after, that kind of thing. And then we just looked at attribute selectors. This is selecting based on either the presence of a specific attribute or a specific value for a given attribute. And all of these 6 different ways that we just looked at over the last 2 days give you an incredible degree of control over how to precisely select the elements on the page that you want to do things to. Again, I don't expect you to remember all of them. I need you to understand that they're possible, that there's ways to reach in to each one of these 6 things. The ID of an element, the name of the element itself, the class that an element or elements belong to, the hierarchical relationship in the document tree can be hooked into, a fake element concept that exists only when the document's rendered, before or after, pseudo elements, for example, those can be hooked into. And finally, we can hook into the attributes and their values. Never mind the exact terminology, never mind even the exact name of it. If you didn't remember Combinator Selector, but you knew it had to do with something between relationship of elements, you could find it using Google just on that. CSS Selector element relationship. Let's get nerdy and see what happens. CSS Selector element relationship. Look at that, CSS combinators. How to use relationship to select HTML elements. These are relationship-based selectors. You would find it. It says combine. You go, oh, that's right. I remember when we did class with Eric. It's a combinator. Adjacent sibling combinator. You'd find it just because you knew that you're trying to find a type of selector that handles relationships between elements. All right, good. That's enough of that. Now, there's a fair bit more material I want to go through, but this is not stuff that needs a bunch of classroom presentation. And so part of what you're going to do for homework is go through W3, studying each of these parts, but you're going to do so with a practical lab in mind, okay? I want you to understand a little bit about how color values work. And there's a really good, simple explanation at W3. I definitely want you to understand the box model. In fact, we're going to look at that right now. It is one of the things I do want to mention in class, okay? In talking about design and layout in CSS, we think about this thing called a box model. It's a box that wraps around every element. The element, of course, is the content, is controlled by the tags, of course, but every element also has, when you put it on the screen, padding, a border, and a margin. And they all, if they're used, add to the size that's taken up on the screen. So you'll see this represented quite a bit. We can even see it if we look at our HTML here. Let's take this paragraph right here, and we're going to put it, we're going to give it a border. All right, so actually let's do padding, border, and margin. And let's do it on all of our paragraphs. So let's do some style rules here. We'll say for paragraphs, what do I want to put for, say, padding? I'm going to say that there's 10 pixels around all of the actual content, because padding, as you can see, goes around the content. I also am going to put a border, and it's going to be 5 pixels. And I'm going to set a border color. Where is that? Say green. Now I'm also going to put a margin around all of that. And I'm going to put 10 pixels around it. I don't want anything touching this thing. So let's take this demo 2 and let's re-render it. Oh, I closed it. So Alt B and I'll open it up. Look at the space around these things. Something's wrong though, because I don't have my green border. Let's see what I did wrong. Padding, border, border color, green. So how would I try to figure out what was going wrong here?
Inspect
Good. What am I looking for when I inspect?
the paragraph tag.
I am, but also look what's on the right there. There's the box model on the right. Here's my internal content. So I'm going to right click on this exact, let's take paragraph 6, right click on it. And here I am. I've got the internal content right there. And now here's my padding. And here's my border. Now my border is not showing up. It says it's supposed to be, and look, it's got a dash. Something's wrong with my border. I think, now watch this. I think I need border width. There we go. Still didn't do it. Because you should update in real time. All right, good. So let's just go to the actual literature and figure out what Eric's doing wrong. Borders. All right. Borders all sides, border style. Here's border styles. Border width. Oh, border shorthand. I'm getting this wrong. Okay. There are many properties to consider when dealing with borders. To shorten it, you can say border with style. Oh, I don't have a style, do I? All right. And I'm going to say single. Oh, I saw it. That's right. There we go. Let's see if that does it. All right, there's my borders. Now I want you to notice something. Notice that there's space in between these boxes. And that's because I have a margin. You can see I have a 10 pixel margin right here. Watch when I roll over it. See it get highlighted right there? What if I take it away? It changes the way everything relates to each other. You can take all these things away. Here's the border being changed. Here's the padding. I'm taking away my 10 pixels. Here's the point I want to make is this little box model is of extreme value to you when you're trying to figure out why something's rendering the way it is on the page, and knowing that you have content in the middle, wrapping around it inside the element. You have padding that you can set. Then you have a border around the element. And then outside of the border, you can have a margin. All of these affect the size. How tall is this? We got 10 and 5 is 15. And then 10 is 25 pixels. And this is, I think, another 10 pixels. So that's 35, 45, 50, 60. This is 60 pixels tall from top to bottom. And so this will help you understand why things are fitting the way they are on a page. So that's the box model. I wanted you to see all of that. All right, other concepts here in the Markdown. Look up this icon thing. This is kind of valuable. And then in particular, read through the display sections, and you'll be using those in your labs a lot. There's information about how to position things. It's kind of fun. How to make layers. Again, this stuff is kind of cool. Float is of particular importance. In fact, I'm going to put here, that is important for you to look at, okay? The last thing I want to look at is this concept of an M. Has anybody here ever heard of EM in CSS?
Yeah, I have.
What does it mean?
It's relative to the. Are you talking about EM or REM?
No, EM.
EM. It's what it. It's based off the value of the font size, and the body.
Good.
Or in the element before it, maybe. I can't
Yeah.
remember.
So this is something that you've got to get really, really nerdy to understand, but it's also extremely confusing when you're trying to use it. So I want to show you something here. If we look down at the bottom and look at units here, there are several different units for length. There's a lot of places where we're going to pass in a value that represents a length. Width needs a length. Margin, padding, font size. They all need a length. It'll be a unit like 5, 100, 2, right? Oh, sorry. It'll be a unit like width, margin, padding. And then you're going to have some sort of measurement after it. Well, first of all, what's a pixel?
A dot on the screen.
A dot on the screen. Are all pixels the same size?
Yes.
Nope. Totally depends on the actual monitor you're looking at. A pixel is simply the smallest divisible unit we can use to create images on a screen. So the density of those pixels just depends on the manufacturer, how closely packed in they are. But pixels can be large or small. The important thing to know is that for a given monitor, it's a fixed width. A pixel is a pixel is a pixel for a given monitor. I could have a really old school monitor that I was working with, and my pixels would be much wider because the actual physical spot on the screen that's capable of being controlled with color is just larger. And knowing that it's a fixed amount for a given display is really key to figuring out what you're going to do. Now, an EM An M, this is a different concept. So Ellen, by the way, Ellen, did that make sense about pixels?
Yes.
Okay, good, excellent. To understand where EM comes from, you've got to go way back to when people were actually doing printing using little teeny pieces of lead that had the letters stamped into them. I had a pretty interesting experience when I was 16 or 17, right before my senior year in high school. In my small town, there was a print shop, and I got a summer job working there. And it's really fascinating, and it actually has helped a lot to understand some of this stuff. What was really not awesome about it was that about 2 months after I quit the job to go back to school, right? Because it was just me a summer job. But about 2 months, like about November of that year, the owner who I worked with every day for a whole summer got arrested for making about $4.5 million in counterfeit $20 bills. So the print shop went away. And I realized how close I came to really being involved in serious trouble. I never saw anything happen, I swear. All right, so let's talk about printing. Has anybody ever actually seen like lead type?
Oh, don't think I have.
These are pieces of lead type. They're actually little like individual blocks, each of which has in reverse the letter you want to, or that's a symbol you want to be stamped onto a page. And you literally take these and you put them in a big rack like this. Let's see if this is a little bit better. See if there's a blow up really, really big. Yeah, let me give a little bit of Control plus here. Will that do it? Oh man, look at that. That's too big. All right, you can see the individual pieces. There's an individual piece right here. Looks like a backwards S. Here's another block. This is a U, I think. Over here, I think we can read this one. Yeah, you can see the individual characters here, right? Each of those is an individual lead block, and they get laid in rows. And then you take a brush or a roller and you roll ink across them. And then you stamp them onto a piece of parchment. And because they're backwards, now it's forwards, and you can read what's going on. So that's how you made printed documents for hundreds of years. And it's still being done that way in some places. It's really cool, by the way. Here's the thing. A lot of how CSS works comes from this thing you're seeing on the screen and all of the terminology and concepts involved. One of the most important things is this. What is a point in printing? Not a pint, a point. A print point. Here we go. Typography, art and technique of arranging type. Type is the individual letters, okay, and symbols. A point is the smallest unit of measure. Look at that diagram that popped up on the screen and see the numbers 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You see those down at the bottom, right? These are individual, like how small of a width are we dealing with? So some pieces of type are larger, some are smaller, but for a given like set of symbols, there is a minimum width you're going to work with. And that's the point. And it changes based on the size of your font. So that's what a point is. You'll see this symbol a lot. This point thing is used for measuring your font size. Leading. Now, leading is interesting. That's not pronounced leading. This is pronounced leading. It's the space between adjacent lines of type. If we go back to this picture we had here and actually go into this, scroll down, you can see leading right here. is an actual piece of lead inserted to provide a separator. Good. So I messed that up. Here we go. So here's why I'm bringing this up is we look at this thing called an M, and it's defined relative to this word point. It's a certain number of points. And I want you to understand what a point is. It's the smallest unit of measure when you're designing these printed characters. So now if we look at M, typography. There it is. This is another unit. Point is a unit, and so is M. And M is the currently specified point size. Now, what's a point size? This is the how wide or how big the characters are in a given font. When you're doing Word and you're selecting a font size, what you're really selecting is a point size. That's what this is right here. If you select 16, which happens to be the most common or the default point size of the web is 16. That means that if you were the designer making all these individual symbols, like the real small ones, like an L and an I and a dot, right? That the smallest unit you have to work with is called a point. And you could say that this symbol is 1 point wide and the B might be 5 points wide. You're never going to need to know all this nerdy stuff. You're not designing fonts. But I just want you to have an understanding of where the term comes from, because what it also tells you is that an M is variable in width depending upon the size of your font. An M is totally based on what point size for the font have we chosen. So if your font is 16 points, then an M is 16 points. If you change your font size, M gets bigger or smaller, depending. So if we go all the way back here and we set a width or a margin or a padding using M, it's relative. It's relative to the font size we've chosen at that exact moment. And what this means is we can have greater control over it. If we use pixel, we don't get to control anything. It's based purely on how that monitor displays pixels. And if people make their display smaller or bigger, we're not going to be able to modify what we're doing. Like, look at units, CSS units. Notice it gets smaller right there. We're scaling down the point size of that font. Pixels won't scale like that. That's the big takeaway here. If you want relative sizing, go with M. If you want absolute sizing, go with pixels. Now, there's a lot more nuance to it, but understanding the nuanced way that people are doing these things starts with an understanding of that fundamental difference between these two ways of doing length. I just want to cover that before we end it off. All right, any questions about that, about M? All right, the other one you're going to see is an N, E-N. Have you guys seen this before? I think I'm going to have typography and n dash. There it is. This is another unit of width. It's half the width of the M. So it is also variable in length.
I've never seen that before.
Yep. So you're going to bump into these weird things. Now, look, it's impossible to know every single technical term involved in all of technology. That's not my goal in this. But I want to call particular attention to two things. One, the specific ones that often hang people up. And two, the importance of clearing up the meaning of the words, because you're going to encounter this all the way throughout your technology career, over and over again. Okay. And it's important to do this nerdy, deep research to really understand what the heck these words mean, or you can't use them that easily. All right. That's all I have for today. Now, I'm going to have your assignment to you by tomorrow afternoon. I'm not going to do it tonight because I have to get up at the crack of yuck to be able to do training. Okay. But by tomorrow afternoon in Discord, I will throw in the assignment. For now, continue on with the CSS portion in that free code camp. And if you run all the way through that, then take this markdown doc, which I will send to you right now in chat. The notes from today, let's see, 426 CSS part 2. Grab that markdown doc that I just put in chat right now and literally just start going through the individual notes I put in there and reading through the applicable W3 section on it. And most important part, doing the actual try it here, working in that live code editor to make sure you understand them, okay? And I'm gonna want you to have done that before you actually start on the practical lab I'm gonna give you anyway. So you don't need the lab immediately. So first assignment, finish the CSS portion of free code camp. Second one, study in W3 schools, everything I have in the markdown. And third, do the project that I'm going to give you. Any questions?
Nope.
Okay, cool. All right, I'll be available by Discord all throughout the week. Let me know if you need anything. And we're going to call it a night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks. Have a good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
all.
Bye.
Bye.